The ultimate evidence of the Holy Spirit in our lives is not signs, miracles, wonders, gifts, tongues, faith, hope, or holiness. The greatest evidence of the presence of the Holy Spirit in us is love. There are three things that will endure: faith, hope, and love. And the greatest of these is love. Love is how the world knows we're followers of Jesus. Love motivates us to minister to the least and the most difficult of these, and in doing so, to serve and love Jesus. Love inspires two great commandments that Jesus gave to us. Love agape, that is selfless, unconditional, and completely giving, is impossible without the help of the Holy Spirit. He pours God's love out of our hearts. For we know how dearly God loves us, because He has given us the Holy Spirit to fill our hearts with His love. When the Holy Spirit fills us with love, every fear, every worry flees. This is God 321. And now, here's your host, Danny Hutchins.
And a very good Monday afternoon to you, and welcome to God 321. Danny Hutchins, your usual host for the program, is off on this Monday, and he's made some very special arrangements. Going to be talking about transforming the culture. We have with us today a man who teaches and knows quite a bit about ethics and character. I present to you Dr. Ray Mckinley. Good afternoon, sir.
Good afternoon. Thank you, Steve, for that introduction. It's good to be here, and I want to thank Danny for giving me this opportunity to be here today with you and share with you some ideas that have transformed my life, transformed my culture, in my business and in my family. So we'll kind of be covering a lot of things today, and we hope that it's of interest to you. And please let us know what you think by giving us your feedback at www.faithtalk1500.com. Or you can always contact me directly at cultureofcharacter@gmail.com. So let's get started. A little bit about why this is happening on Mondays. I met with Danny the last two Mondays, and many of you might have listened in, and we had some interesting discussion about some concerns that we have in society as a general, and the continual breakdown of our culture in our society. And there's a lot of reasons for it, and many of us have heard the reasons over and over again. And one of the things I want to do is not necessarily lament on all of those reasons, but let's talk a little bit about some things we can do to maybe make a change. And this is where what I've been focusing on for the last few years as I began to really understand how important the character is in the individual and how important that and the influence that has on a culture. So what is happening and what are we going to do about it? But before I get into that, I want to tell you a little bit more about myself. And I'm a dentist, and I practice in Shelby Township, Michigan. And you might be asking why a dentist would be on a radio show talking about character and culture. And the reason it is because it's had such an impact on my life. I felt at one time, and actually in high school, I received a character award. The student in the senior class who was known to have the highest character. And this was an award that was given by the teachers. And I always felt that I was a person of good character, so it wasn't really an issue for me. But as I went on in my young adult life and started to see the dead bodies I was leaving along the side of the road in my relationships, I started to question maybe there's something more to it than this. And there was also a time in my life I was very, very resistant to God and the influence God was having on my life. I, like many of us, go through times and suffering where we get mad and angry at God, and I would have to say I became extremely angry at God. And I did everything I could to avoid Him in my life and had a lot of resistance. And one day I finally realized, and it took me a number of years to do that, where I realized that maybe, well, if I was that angry at God, then maybe I must really believe in God after all, because I kept trying to convince myself I didn't believe. And I said, how can I be that angry at somebody or something that I don't believe in? And I started to really look at my anger and my frustration and how my relationships weren't working. And it really came back to my lack of faith, my crisis in faith, and my lack of character. So I really started to research it and investigate it and see the effect that it had on my life. It therefore transformed the way I practiced dentistry. It transformed the relationship I had with my staff. It transformed the culture of our business. It transformed the culture of my relationships with my children, and I have 6 of them. And as I pursued this even more, I began to see a frustration with the students and the young people coming out of the high schools and colleges and coming into the workforce. And as these kids came into the workforce, I said, there's something missing here. They're not coming for the right reason. And I said their focus is not where it needs to be. I observed that there was a lack of respect and honor in living out principles of respect and honor for the elderly, for employees, and for each other. I observed that most of the young people coming into the workforce were coming to get, not coming to give. There was a sense of entitlement. They were more interested in being paid for their time than they were interested in creating value for the places they were working. And I said the message obviously is not coming through to them through their experiences in their educational processes. So, as it turned out, I had an opportunity to speak to the school head of the superintendent of schools of a Lutheran High School Association here in Detroit, and I shared some concerns with him about that, and I said, the business community really has a lot to offer, I think, these students of today, because we're seeing the effects of something missing in their education. Would you be interested in putting a course together which would include some mentors that could help change this existing paradigm that exists in the students of today that's causing them to be less effective as they enter the workforce, and certainly less effective as they enter college. So as I put together a syllabus for that class, it was approved by the Board of Education, and we began teaching that 7 years ago. Well, the most amazing thing about that is what I learned about character, because as I started to teach it, I learned a lot more about it. And it's that transformation of character that we saw in the workplace and in the transformation of the character in the students in the class that really got the attention of a lot of the people, a lot of the mentors who were a part of the process. And as a result, I've been invited to other organizations and other institutions to work with them and process them through transforming their culture through understanding how character is debilitating their culture, or their lack of character is debilitating their culture. So through teaching it, I was learning it myself. And one of the things that really came out of my initial interaction with the students in the classroom was how there was really a question of motivation, how much they were motivated to conform, and how much they were motivated to please their parents, in so much that was such a important part of their life. And it was also to please the teachers. And I really started to see that the motivation was what I would call outward motivation, and there was very little inward motivation or intrinsic motivation that caused the kids to do what they did. So if you ask the students body, why do you come to school every day? If you had the opportunity to be here or not be here, what would you choose? And of course, almost everyone raised their hand to not be here. Well, clearly they were coming for other reasons. And what are the reasons you're coming to school? Because I have to. I'll get in trouble if I don't. My parents will ground me. They'll take away my car. And then we had all the reasons why they were choosing to come to school, which were all outward motivations. I also observed in the workplace a very similar thing, in that people often come to the work really for the same outward motivations. They basically cut because they have to. They have to earn money. They have to earn a living. They don't necessarily want to, but they're forced to. And very few people are coming to work for the reasons of bringing value to the workplace. And very few students were coming into the schools to bring value to their lives by what they were learning, and they were able to take out of that educational process off to college and beyond. So I really started to focus on what's motivating the young people of today. And we've read a number of books, and one of the ones that we've read is by the Harris brothers. And the Harris brothers wrote a book recently about how we're debilitating the kids of today by taking away their motivation, and that we really don't believe that they're capable. And because we don't believe that they're capable, we seem to do everything for them, and we end up becoming what we would call helicopter parents. Helicopter parents are those parents that feel like they have to step in at every turn to rescue the kids from their mischief, or rescue their kids from having a tough decision passed down onto them. So as a result of that, the kids never learn about how to handle those tough situations. And it's through those tough situations and through the suffering that we go through that we really do learn. And it really does challenge our character and test our character. And I think God oftentimes has a sense of humor about that. I certainly have experienced that in my life because he challenges me with things frequently. And I ask him, haven't I learned enough? Do I need to be challenged again? And through the suffering of that challenge, I end up learning more about myself, which then helps me hopefully be a better person of character, and also helps me teach others to do the same. So those are some of the things that I wanted you to know about me, a little bit about me as a dentist, and me as a father, and me as a teacher, that has led me to this passion, if you will, of getting out there and talking about how important character is, and how important character is in the culture of any organization. As I look at that, I think it's important we talk about, well, what is character and what is a culture? Sometimes those words are fused together a little bit, and I think character is something that we need to understand as something we're not born with. It comes from what we are taught. It's come from what we're taught by our parents, teachers, and preachers, but it's also taught by what we have experienced and what we have learned through trial and error. Sometimes what we are taught through trial and error and through our experiences is more impactful than what we have been taught by our parents, teachers, and preachers. It frequently comes from what we learn from who we emulate, who we look up to. And of course, as we can certainly look at some of the role models of today and start questioning the character values that are being projected onto our young people as we look to emulating some of those people in today's society. It's how we want to be seen by others. We're very focused on what others think of us. We want to be approved of. We want to win the approval of others. And so we focus on being a certain way and doing certain things that to win the acceptance and approval of others. We've come to realize that we make predefined choices. Hopefully we make predefined choices that we consider things in advance, and we say, if this ever happens, this is what I'm going to do. That's really being a person of character, is deciding what choices we're making in advance before things even happen. We're affected by our parents' values. We're affected by our core beliefs. And as I like to define character as being the belief, values, and principles that are built into a person's life that determine how they respond in every situation. And last week I talked about the response model. The response model being, in any given situation, we all seem to respond differently. And when you ever want to wonder why someone responds differently, than you would respond, you might ask yourself, and how in the world would they respond that way? It seems like the most logical way to respond to that situation is the way I respond, because that's what I know. And when someone responds differently, it's really because there's a core belief, value, and principle that's different in their makeup than yours. And most oftentimes, that comes from their personal history, the history of their life, of various things that have happened to them that would cause them to feel the way they do. They may have been through an experience that is different than the experiences you've been through, and they then look at it totally differently than someone else. And, you know, I think a good example of that might be, and you could probably think of thousands of them, and one would be if, for example, if a person had an abortion and another person didn't have an abortion, maybe 10 or 15 years later in their life, something might come along where a friend of the two people or an acquaintance of the two people is going through a decision to have an abortion. And how those two people respond is totally different based on their experiences and everything that happened since that experience of making the decision to or not to. And these kind of conflicts really are important for us to understand in every area as we look at how people respond based on the beliefs they have. Now, the interesting thing that I have found as I've taught these students is they know the right answers. When they come into my class, they've had 12 years, in many cases, 12 years of Christian education, where they really understand the Bible. They understand the verses of the Bible. They've memorized many of them. And they really do know what to say. So when you ask the question, they give you the answer that they expect you would want to hear, or that they think I would want to hear. And those are the answers you get, because that's what they were told to give as the answers. But the question is whether those answers are truly a part of their core belief. Many times, the answers are there just because they were told to give them. I find that interesting as I worked with these students in the class, and you ask them about it, you come to find out that these beliefs are well anchored in anchored in their brain, because that's where they were taught, and they can regurgitate it back out in the form of a belief. But the question is, does that belief that you've been taught become a part of your life? In other words, does that move down into your body? Does it move into your heart? When you have a belief, and you've been told to have a belief your whole life, and this is what it should be, this is what your belief should be, does it move down into your heart, and does it become a core belief from the inside? And more importantly, does it even move down into your gut? Does it move what's called a visceral belief, a belief that's really creates a physiological response in your body? You know, I think an example of that would be maybe one where you look and say to a person, are you afraid of heights? And the person says, yes, I'm afraid of heights. That comes from their head. If you start telling a story about it, maybe they start even getting emotional about it. But if you take them up on top of a tall building and put them to the edge of the window, you'll see a visceral response, a physical response out of them that really gives you the very clear image that this belief goes deep to their core. Now, you can talk to them about what led to that or how that came to be, but those are beliefs that really sink in. And I think many times we look at that and we say, how strong are our beliefs? One of the challenges I ask people to consider is this. Imagine yourself on top of two buildings, very high up in the air, 100 stories tall. You're on the edge of one building, on the top of one building, and on the other building you see a crying boy of about 2.5 years old, crying because he's scared and afraid, and no one else is around to help the boy. There's a plank across the road laying on your roof, and you happen to throw that plank down, and it spans across these two buildings 40 feet span across these two buildings, and you're now having to make a decision whether you're going to cross that plank to rescue that child. And it's a good call. It's a good decision. It's a tough decision. You got to look at that. When I ask the students that, many of the kids say, well, maybe, if it was my own kid, I would. Or, no, there's no way I ever would. And then you hear other kids say, absolutely, I would do anything. I would do it in a heartbeat. So it's interesting. Here's a situation. You see the response being different. And then you have the belief and value and principle in that person's life that determines that response. Another one was kind of interesting that I did. I talked to the students about, do you believe in sex before marriage? And of course, they said, oh, no, absolutely not. We don't never have sex before marriage. And I said, okay, there's 30 of you in this classroom, and how many of you believe that? And of course, everyone raised their hands that, no, we will not have sex before we get married. Okay, that's great. And then I asked the question, based on the culture of the United States today, how many people, what percentage of teenagers today will have success of getting to that point in their life where the day they're married, they never had sex with another person? And it's, most people wouldn't be able to do that. Probably 80% are going to have sex before they get married, or 70% or 90%, or everybody's going to. And I said, isn't it interesting that you've made the observation that culturally that will happen to 80%, 90% of the students of today, but in this classroom, it's not going to happen to any of you. And that's an interesting awareness, because then I asked the next question, and I said, now tell me a little bit of how come. Why wouldn't you have sex before you got married? And of course, someone raises their hand because it's against, my father and mother would kill me. Or another one might say, well, the Bible says not to. It's the wrong thing to do. So you hear these reasons, these right answers of how come they would not have sex before marriage. Then, as I went around the room and I kept getting this feedback, I had one person say to me, and I found this answer to be very interesting. She said, Dr. McKinley, I wouldn't have sex before marriage, and I'll tell you why. And I said, how come? And she says, because the day of my wedding night, I want to look into my husband's eyes, my new husband's eyes, and know that this is a special moment for the two of us. Now, when she said that, I said, now that was a different type of reason than all the other reasons I had, because that clearly was emotional. She had a feeling inside of herself, and her physiology of when she was saying it was clearly, this was coming from her heart. This was coming from a visceral feeling. That's a strong belief. Where I would have seen all the other beliefs expressed in the class as being what I call head beliefs. Head beliefs that were placed there by their parents, teachers, and preachers. Now, the question is, as they go off to college and they get exposed to other cultures, and they get exposed to feelings that are different than that, and beliefs that are different than that, and actions that are different than that, how strong is that belief that, no, I'm not going to have sex before marriage? I watched a movie last night, or rewatched a movie last night, and I didn't catch this line before, but I caught it again. And it was The Proposal, and Sandy Bullock said, I haven't had sex in 18 months. Of course, she's not married in the movie, and I haven't had sex in 18 months, as she self-disclosed to this young man. And, of course, the young man says, oh, man, 18 months, how could you do it? And it's like, that's an interesting message projected out there to the movie-going audiences of today. But the culture clearly is making it okay. And it's very difficult for these young men and women to be told on one side, hey, it's wrong. It's a head belief. I know it's wrong. But then the visceral, is it strong enough to really come into play. So how strong are the beliefs and where are they placed is an important part of recognizing how you're going to respond to every situation. So what I really talk to the students about is you need to find a way to move your beliefs from your head down to your heart and into your gut, because that's truly where they need to reside in order for them to really control how you respond to the situations that you're challenged with in the years to come. Now, after that little monologue, I want to take a little break here for a second and see if I have a guest who has joined us. And I asked this guest to join us because many times she has had an opportunity to listen to me pontificate about ideas, and she has oftentimes sat into the classroom and heard me pontificate about ideas. She has heard me lecture about these ideas to dentists and dentist staff over the years, and she has been my greatest audience and from the standpoint of giving me feedback. And in her own right, a great teacher of the concepts of transforming character. She, in fact, has taught the class to 8th graders, taught character concepts to 8th graders, and has assisted me as well in teaching character to the high school student. And very much a part of activating a transition in character in our workplace, because we do work together. And this is my wife, Lynn Mckinley. And is she on with us, Steve?
I'm here.
Welcome, Lynn, and thanks for joining us. And, I hope to have other guests in the future, but I felt I'd bring the most important guest on first, and that's why I asked you to join us today.
Thank you.
Is there anything that you heard here earlier that you would like to add to or have a question about so we can make this a little more interactive?
Well, what comes up for me is, as you're talking about this, I'm wondering what type of response do you get from the students when you introduce some of these ideas and concepts? For example, the difference between the right answer and the Sunday school answer and an answer that they own themselves.
Yes, that's a great dichotomy that we see in the classroom, because they're so many of the students are so locked into the right answer and the answer that they've been taught to have, and they stand on it with firm ground, and they are convinced that they cannot break away from that. If somebody else expresses an answer that's different than the right answer, I find that the person with the right answer, many of them who have had their answers come from their religious teachings, I find them oftentimes very resistant to any other answer that could possibly exist. So much so that it creates a lot of conflict. We have had a number of guest speakers. We have a lot of guest speakers that come in and speak to the class. And the guest speakers might say something that they might not see as biblical truth. And, of course, they immediately go on the attack of challenging the speaker about their statement as far as being biblically true or not. And of course, that, is really wanting to be right, needing to be right, trying to convince the other person that they're wrong. And if you look at that, that's what I would define as being self-righteous. I would also define that as being getting defensive. And we talk quite a bit in the class about being defensive. And being defensive is an out of character quality or lack of quality. Because being defensive is making the other person wrong. And it requires a judgment, first of all, a value judgment that they are wrong, and a value judgment that I am right and they are wrong, and I'm going to prove that they're wrong. And there's a sense of pride that goes with that, a feeling that I'm right and I'm proud of it, and I'm not. That's not going to change. So the interesting thing about that seems to be the catch that many of the students have, to recognize that they say, well, it's important that I'm right, it is the right answer. I've been taught it for 12 years, so I need to stand up for my faith and know that it's the right answer. But it's when I project it onto the other person and making them wrong that, in fact, I'm being judgmental and out of character. Does that help you?
Yeah, I was just thinking as you were talking about that, how that has played out in the workplace as we work to build a culture of character here in our business. We've had some interesting responses from new employees that have come in and their response to the concepts. Maybe you might want to talk about that for a minute and let people know that it can be a tough thing to start up and to hang on to as you introduce new people.
Yes, we've noticed that very much so as we've tried to introduce new people into our office, as we have grown as an office of character, as I would define it to be. When we look back to 7 or 8 years ago when we first started this quest to improve the individual character of all of us, not just the receptionist, not just the hygienist, not just the assistant, not just me. All of us have looked at what we can do as an individual to improve our own character so that we can change the culture of our dental practice. And because I've said before, and I may have said it last week, and I'll say it again, studying character and developing character is a prescription for self. It is something we need to do for ourselves. We oftentimes, when we look at character, we're quick to point out the lack of character in others. And when we first started our staff meetings to talk about this, that's in fact what happened. We first start pointing out the character flaws of other people and being blind to our own character flaws, because those are our blind spots. We oftentimes see the mischief of another person much better than we see our own mischief. So this is one of the things that happened as we developed our character, and we became better at it. Maybe we did some of the things. Maybe we did a lot less blaming, which is one of the biggest character flaws you can have. A lot less excuse making. And as we brought new people in, of course, they come from a culture that in a previous environment, which didn't see that as being important. So they would be challenged by the fact of making excuses is not acceptable, and blaming another is not acceptable. And sometimes, frequently, bringing in a new staff member, after 2 or 3 or 4 weeks, they realize, this isn't a fit for me. And what they're saying is the culture doesn't fit for them. It's too big of a gap. It's too big of a leap for them to see where they need to move to. Now, sometimes maybe we could be a little more patient, a little more tolerant with some of the young new people coming on board and allow them a little more time to transition into character. But we frequently find a person that does step forward, come into our workplace, and immediately sees the value, recognizes that they came from a previous place of work that had a lot of blaming, a lot of excuse-making, a lot of self-pity, a lot of judgment, a lot of criticism, a lot of fear. All of these things cripple character and character development. And they see that we're doing everything we can to try to squelch those negative habits in not only our practice, in our work life, but in our personal life. Because many of these things obviously carry right over from one to the other. So we have seen it work for some and not work for others as they've come into the workplace. And I think the key in that is does the person come to get, or are they coming to give? And I think that's a key aspect of any new employee, is really finding out from them, are they coming to get, or are they coming to give? Are they coming to raise the value in the business because of their influence on it, or are they coming to take? And that becomes an important separator, separating out the kind of staff that we're looking for, certainly in our office. And I think as you start developing a culture of character, it's important that you hire for character. We really hire for character much more than we hire for skill. We can teach the skill. we can develop this skill. It's very difficult to develop the character. So hiring for character becomes a key aspect of developing and transforming your business or your organization to an organization of character.
Well, you talked about creating chaos for the students, and I think in the dental office, a new employee, that it creates enough chaos in them that it is easier to walk away than to work through it. And I'm wondering, as you have students that have it's created a lot of chaos and they go off to college and go off onto their life, have you ever heard back from some of those students? Maybe you can tell a story or two about students that were really in chaos and really resistant to the ideas, and the feedback you've gotten a month, a year, or 2 years later.
Yeah, I think it's, in creating the chaos and challenging the person in the workplace to elevate their understanding of being a person of character, and pointing out or having them recognize, not necessarily pointing out, but having them recognize, based on the discussions we're having in our staff meetings, that they are blaming and they are maybe making excuses and they are value judging other people. That when we really challenge that and they see that they are, and it's a blind spot uncovered, they have to make a decision about that self-awareness they had. They have to say, do I want to work this out, or do I not want to work this out? Those who want to work it out and see it as an opportunity to learn stay on, and they become a part of a growing team. I think in the school environment, it's a little different. I think many of the students, they look at this and say, man, if I could drop this class, I would. And in high school, you're allowed to drop it for about 2.5 weeks, and then after that, you're not allowed to. So we have some kids who catch on right away, and they drop it in the first couple of weeks, and we basically challenge the parents. We meet with all the parents before the night of the last drop date, the eve of the last drop date, and we talk to the parents about how we're going to create chaos for these kids and how we're going to challenge their paradigms, their existing paradigms, and cause them to go to a deeper level. And as they do that and they get frustrated with that, they're going to come home and complain. And they're going to be looking for you to rescue them and solve their problem for them. That's perfect. That's what we want them to do. But it's your response to that that's important. If you, in fact, do rescue them and don't allow them to struggle through the chaos and struggle through the challenge, you've missed the opportunity to have a teachable moment. So we'd encourage you to handle it a little differently. So because the kids are locked down, if you will, in the classroom, they don't have the ability to quit. They really get very frustrated, and they can kind of lash out and become discouraged and complain. But that complaint is really what we use as the teachable tool. That the level of their visceral anger or their frustration is really what we use to get them to have a paradigm shift. And because they catch themselves in their mischief, they understand what it is they're doing and say, oh, now I see what being judgmental is, or now I see what it is to be, critical of another person, always needing to be right. And then they catch themselves being prideful, and they say, oh, man, all these things fit now. And they start putting it together. But it oftentimes takes, the 2-semester class, 9 months who are exposed to they're exposed to the ideas. Some of them take all 9 months before they really get it and they really understand it. And I think, and some walk away out of the school and don't. I walk the last day of school. I think I get frustrated that maybe I didn't reach a couple of the students, but lo and behold, I end up running into them at some point in the future, and the feedback that I get from them and how they really, really didn't get it until they got off to college and they started to see the things that I was talking about, and they got off in the workplace and started to see the things that I was talking about, that they really, really got it. And that's probably some of the best feedback I've had about the value of what I'm doing is these students coming back years later, calling me and saying, can I come and speak to the class? I want to tell them what a difference this made in my life. And it's been my greatest compensation. I don't get paid to teach a class. I volunteer to do it. But I'm compensated very much by the difference that it makes in these young people's lives. And I feel like for myself, as I get frustrated with the cultural issues of the day that I can just complain about it myself, or I can try to do something about it. Do you have another question?
Well, I was thinking about a couple of stories in particular of students that they have had a lot of questions, and the interesting thing that happened this year with the ability to have the internet and Wi-Fi available to the students as you would tell stories and talk about experiences out there in the world, and how that has changed your credibility, I guess.
Yes, I think some of the times I tell stories and situations to the students and they look at me like I'm making it up. And this year was the first year that we allowed the students to have their little cell phones and their handheld computers, and even allowed them to have a laptop if they wanted. And as I would be sharing some of these things that would happen as in real-world situations, they would look them up and find them on the internet. And they'd all say, "Oh, wow, that's unbelievable! I can't believe that." And it would really create a very interesting dynamic. I think before they thought I was making it up, because I challenge them. I basically say, where does your personal responsibility lie? Here's an example of one that happened this year. I said, who is responsible for your death or your crippled body if you are driving through an intersection at 12:30 at night and you're broadside by someone who's been drinking and you are either dead or crippled for life? Who has responsibility in that death? Who is to blame? And all the students, of course, immediately say, "Well, the drunk driver, he was responsible. And it was all his fault." And I say, yes, there's truth to what you say, but who else was at fault? Well, what do you mean, who else was at fault? Well, did you have any part in being at fault? Well, no. How could I have any part of being at fault? Did you have any personal responsibility in your own death? Or your own being crippled? And I said, well, no, there's no way. It was the driver's fault. And I said, really? Now, when you made a decision to drive at 12:30 at night, how many people did you estimate would be on the road that had been drinking and had alcohol? And in that estimation, did you imagine any of them could possibly run a red light? And were you more cautious as you approached that intersection at 12:30 at night than you would have been at 4 o'clock in the afternoon? So maybe you do have responsibility when you decide to go out on the road, and I think we all have responsibility every time we go out on the road to take the risk of being on the road. One of the things I talk to my kids about constantly is I said, do you really need to go up to the gas station to get a pop? Because why do you want to put yourself at risk to be on the road just to go get a pop? And it's kind of interesting. We are so readily able and willing to put ourselves at risk and quick to blame those who maybe create some challenges for us because we fail to take personal responsibility for that. So it's really kind of interesting to watch these kids understand that maybe they do have a little choice in that accident and that they have a choice of the outcomes they're getting in their life. It's in many times we're quick to blame other people. We're quick to not see our role in the mischief. And that's a real transition for all of us to have, is that we basically have responsibility to really almost everything that happens in our life. We have some level of responsibility. Now, in a court of law, clearly the person will be prosecuted and be given the consequences under the law. But the reality is we have responsibility in that death.
Well, and the ability to make a principle-based decision and do some critical thinking at a young age has been really diminished by the helicopter parent that you referred to. The parent is making all of the decisions, and so when the child or the student is of an age to drive, they really haven't developed the ability think things through at the consequence. They're thinking about just the immediate gratification and not all of the what-ifs that could happen.
Well, I think that's very true, and one of the things we've observed is we've really diminished our ability for our kids to critically think. Critical thinking skills is a skill that's really underdeveloped in this country. Many other countries have actually critical thinking classes in high school on critical thinking. And we pretty much, a lot of people have never heard of what it is to critically think. Certainly the students don't, because they really haven't had the challenge to be critically thinking, because they basically have had everybody else doing the thinking for them. From their teachers to their parents, they're all doing the thinking for them. So we really wake up as an 18-year-old going off to college and really not be having a lot of practice making the decisions that we need to make. And, it was interesting. I had a patient in last week, and I was challenging her, basically asking her to make a decision about what she wanted to do, about the situations that I just presented to her that existed in her mouth. I presented about 6 situations and gave her the consequences if they were unattended and the consequences if she did attend to them. And I asked, what do you want to do? Because it is your choice. It is your mouth. It is your, it's not mine. It's your choice. And she said, well, I don't know. I'm not very good at making those decisions. I'd never really made those kinds of decisions. I need someone to make them for me. And I thought that was kind of interesting, that a person in their mid-20s is still struggling with making a decision because they didn't have the decision maker sitting right next to them. And as I observed that, this decision maker being the parent, I observed that many times we then move and leave our decision-making parents and go off on our own. And we start then deferring to the decision-making power of our peer group. And when we have the decision-making power of our peer group influencing us, let the pigeons loose. No telling what can happen as we allow the peer group to affect our thinking and affect the choices that we make.
Right, and then not making a decision is really making a decision.
Absolutely.
Not leaving your future to the whim of the world.
Yeah, not making a decision about what I'm going to do with my life, not making a decision of, what I'm preparing for by the time I'm 30 years old or 25 years old, and what I'm going to be in future pacing that time in my life where I can say, at 25 years old, this is what I'm going to have in my life, and this is what I'm going to be, and these are the people I'm going to bring into my life. That's so important, because unless you can critically think that through and plan that out in advance, you are subject to the whim of circumstances and subject to whichever way the wind blows, or whichever person you happen to be in contact with, or whichever one you're in a relationship with, and all of a sudden their beliefs and their values are now carrying the day for you, and yours are being subrogated because you have not had the backbone to put them into the forms of predefined principles. So I think it's important that we take the beliefs, values, and principles, look at them, be clear what our predefined principles in our life, and act them out through our life. Hey, in the next couple Mondays, we're going to talk about this more, and we'd love to have your feedback and let us know what you think and some questions and direction you'd like to go, because you are the ones that we're doing this for. You can certainly let them know here. Steve is going to come on in a minute and let you know that. You can also contact me at cultureofcharacter at gmail.com. Steve, it's yours. Thank you again for being such a great engineer, and we'll see you next Monday.
Hey, thank you. Once again, with your email address, Ray?
Yes, it's cultureofcharacter at gmail.com.
Super. And if our listeners have any input, I hope they will make a call to that email address and send on a note. You are listening to God 321 on a Monday, and tomorrow we will have Danny Hutchins back in the seat once more. And I want to let you know that everything is available for you from this show, including podcasts and information on contacting Danny Hutchins at God321.net. That's God321.net. As we do every weekday, this program will be rebroadcast this evening at 11 o'clock. Our thanks to Dr. Ray Mckinley and his wife Lynn, talking ethics and character here on God 321.
Thanks for listening to God 321 with Dan Hutchins. God 321 is sponsored by Dihydro Services, Inc. To learn more about the person of the Holy Spirit, visit God321.net. That's God321.net. Or call 586-978-0541. That's 586-978-0541.